Hey friends, guess who's going to CrimeCon UK? CrimeCon, the world's #1 true crime event, is coming back to London from Saturday the 10th to Sunday the 12th of June 2023. Get inside the mind of serial killers and psychopaths, learn from leading criminologists, hear from the families and survivors, meet your favorite true crime podcasters, immerse yourself in forensic evidence, and delve deeper into unsolved crimes. CrimeCon is the ultimate true crime weekend partnered by CBS Reality, the expert-led true crime TV channel. I will be there, so come and join me. Use quote consequence for a special 10% discount. Tickets are on sale now. For more information, visit crimecon.co.uk and use code consequence to save 10%. If you love true crime, then you need to go. There's going to be content creators with more than 30 of your favorite podcasters, including me. True crime YouTubers, there'll be a live recording studio with audiences. Join me at CrimeCon UK. Go to crimecon.co.uk and use code consequence to save 10% off on your tickets. I can't wait to see you there.
Hello, twisted humans.
Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting?
Then this is the podcast for you.
In 1952, there was a record high of UFOs reported. 1,500 sightings.
There has been evidence of human sacrifice, devil worship, and it is haunted by more spirits than can be counted.
A family of 2 adults and 2 kids reportedly saw a giant flying thing with glowing red eyes.
And meanwhile, the family's nanny that helped Veronica to care for her and Lucian's children was found bludgeoned to death in the basement of their family home. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sierra, and this is Twisted and Uncorked.
Hey friend, it's Eric Carter-Landin, the host and producer of True Consequences podcast, and I just want to say thank you to Jackie Moranti for writing and researching this series that I'm about to go into. When we last spoke, we talked about the murder of Father Reynaldo and the circumstances surrounding that murder. Today, we're going to start discussing the investigation. Okay, let's get into it. During the investigation into Father Reynaldo's murder, several letters were sent to various government agencies, the Archdiocese, and a few Catholic churches that claimed that Father Reynaldo was murdered because he had something to do with civil wars in Latin America. Several civil wars had broken out in Central and South America during the 60s. These wars lasted well into the 90s, and Catholic priests who were ministering to various indigenous peoples in those areas were put in the middle of those civil wars. These wars were very much about the rich against the poor. While the rich had backing of the U.S. government, the poor had missionary priests who were only armed in faith, many of whom would become martyrs for staying with the people. Even if they couldn't protect those people, they ministered to them. We've done some very intensive research into Father Reynaldo and his career, and nothing that we've seen or read has connected him to the civil wars in any way. But there are those out there who believe in the conspiracy theories that were created by these letters. After attending seminary in Ohio, Father Reynaldo's career was spent entirely in New Mexico. He was not a missionary priest. While there is a very low probability that he had anything to do with the unrest in Central America, every lead had to be followed. It didn't matter whether it was relevant, whether it was possible, or whether it was related. Every lead had to be followed. There was quite a bit of anonymous mail correspondence during the early years of the investigation. Remember, Father Reynaldo was murdered in 1982, so email was not an option. The letters were very disjointed without coherent thought or direction. Some of these letters referred to the Church of Satan, but those same letters also referred to gun sales in Nicaragua and Guatemala, and they referred to destroying the Catholic Church. The Investigative Services Division, which is now part of Homeland Security, took notice of these letters and sent them on to the Criminal Investigation Division in New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. They had to find out who these entities were and what they were up to. The 80s were the height of the Cold War, but there were also wars happening all over Central America. Guerrilla fighters against governments, many missionary priests were killed from the late 70s to the early 90s, so letters like these could have been intercepted and taken very seriously during this time. The civil wars in Latin America began in the 50s and raged on until the 90s. 40 years of repression, genocide, torture, and starvation for those who were already living in poverty. These were mostly indigenous Mayan people. Many of these human rights violations were supported by several U.S. presidents. The Cold War had led the U.S. government to believe that anything was better than communism, and anyone who had liberalistic ideals was considered a communist. While the U.S. funded governments that they considered to be more conservative, they ignored the fact that people were being tortured, murdered, and disappeared in the name of conservatism. Throughout the 80s, anti-government guerrillas fought against the governments that the U.S. had given weapons, money, and their blessings to do whatever they wanted to keep the leftists in check. It's worth mentioning that the leftist guerrillas were being supported by Russia, which also upped the ante when it came to U.S. support for conservative governments. The 80s were a particularly brutal time for priests ministering in Latin America. The Catholic Church had historically been very conservative-leaning, but during the late 70s and early 80s, they began to change their views, and rather than ministering to the more conservative government, the Pope sent missionaries to minister to those living in poverty. Those who decided that they were called to do so were put in the middle of the civil wars that were such an integral way of life during that time. Many priests were tortured and murdered because they chose to help the poor rather than minister to those who were causing so much pain and destruction. Father Reynaldo's murder occurred during this time, and there were several letters intercepted by the IDS from people who may or may not have been insurgents who had infiltrated the U.S. with the intention of destroying the Catholic Church and U.S. government. The letters that were sent to Washington, D.C. read, KGB, Freedom Foundations of the Americas, Meetings, Burlington, Colorado, September 12, 1982, Las Vegas, Great Bend, Kansas, September 20th, 1982, Phoenix, August 1982. We have successfully eliminated Reverend Reynaldo Rivera. We understand that even though successful, the medical officer in Albuquerque may find some clues. To my regret, as of today, we have contacted Albania through our embassy in Mexico of the problem. We must eliminate the medical examiner. We must eliminate the state police officer George Ulivari. Destroy the car 1976 Chevrolet cream-colored four-door. Find out names of officers working on car. Eliminate. Find out 2 people who found the body around Waldo Chernoff, etc. Eric Lucero, check home also. The preacher, meeting with him in Denver, Colorado, September 20th, 82. Knows assassination team from either Canada or Mexico or contacts in Americas. We doped the gentleman who had it done, or gentleman, or whoever it was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The drugs works effective. Adios, amigos. Mexico loves you. No weapons in El Salvador. Soon also we have American spies who went to Russia. Check out in your areas. We are not working on the Washington Project senators, Russian language courses, Radio Moscow, etc. This probably be our last meeting in Kansas or Great Bend, Kansas. With our meeting places now, we are gradually moving to Colorado and Utah, New York City, and especially the Pentagon or Washington, D.C. main offices. We will have 7 small offices in small towns to operate. We sent letters to Anderson, Marietta, Georgia last night. We regret the preacher has retired, not permanently though. Replacement after traveling through contact Irigo in France next week. We have all records of banks, hospitals, defense installations in the USA last month in our Los Angeles, California office. Our computer experts on the job. We might use Western Kansas or Nebraska, Colorado. For a base later, as of now, void all contacts until 84. If that didn't make any sense to you, you're not alone. It didn't make any sense to us either. Here's the next one. Church of Satan, Great Bend, Kansas, Moscow, Russia, my dear comrades, Albanian comrades, and fellow Cuban college and volunteers for the Freedom Foundation of the American Way of Life in 1984. We have killed all of the Catholic organization in the foreign countries, France and Italy especially. The United States, we will use other methods of destruction of the church. Comrades of Mexico and California are well informed of our plans in the future. As of now, we want you to concentrate on the United States senators and governors. Later, penetrate military installations and small cities of the Midwest, Dakotas, Texas, etc. We will gradually have it our ways. Be patient. We will eliminate all religions in due time. Freedom Foundation of the Americas. P.S. We also gradually want you to have all the grade school children, high school children to learn Russian in school, gradually concentrate on it. We put on a program advertisement on it in September 19th, 1982. Anything more on the Goodland murder, etc. So again, that one was a little bit more coherent, but still didn't really tell us anything. The Church of Satan is mentioned in these letters, and yes, there were rumors of satanic panic surrounding Father Reynaldo's death. While we may never know if the Church of Satan was involved in the wars in Central and South America, or if they really cared to destroy every religion in existence, it's very unlikely that they had anything to do with Father Reynaldo's murder. The Church of Satan is a religion that was founded by Anton Sandor LaVey in 1966. LaVey founded this church based on the human condition, which values materialism and individualism over the needs of others. LaVey claimed that putting oneself ahead of others were psychological principles that all humans shared. As far as I know, the Church of Satan has never been involved in any murders, much less any murder involving the civil unrest in Central America. Nor has it ever claimed any desire to eradicate all religions. However, this idea did run rampant in the 80s and 90s. Many murders were thought to have satanic overtones. Many murderers claimed to have some connection to the Church of Satan or claimed to have committed these murders because, quote, the devil made them do it. The reference to the Church of Satan in these letters probably had some impact on the agencies involved. The fact that the letters called out Father Rivera by name would surely have gotten the attention of local law enforcement agencies. There were open threats that were seemingly made by what were considered communist forces at the time. This would have been the most concerning to federal law enforcement agencies. 3 more letters were sent to law officers of Faust and Vignery in Goodland, Kansas. They read, quote, Moscow, Russia, Albania, Managua, Nicaragua. Topic, economics. El Salvador, Great Bend, Kansas. The Mexican economics of El Salvador, better than expected, but problems, military arms and supplies by the case, ransom money from the kidnappings of businessmen in the 70s are a concern to the Cuban and Miami-based church for the income and a large amount of about 1/5 of our Mexican-based assets. The discussion will be and fully reported to the Kremlin January 5, 1983. The narcotic trade is down in the Miami area, but increasing in Phoenix, Arizona area of the United States. Todor Zikov, Bulgaria, President Haxi Leshi, Albania, President Celso Torriello, Daniel Ortega, Managua, Nicaragua, the execution of Mehmet Ali Aga, the Turkish agent who shot the Pope, the execution of Brigadier General James Dozier, January of L, star pound, KGB, Narcotic Division, Yuri Adpopkov. Here's a second letter. KGB, full complete orders for the Central USA, Albania, Bulgaria, Moscow and Havana, Cuba, Peking and Honolulu, Edmonton. 1969 orders to the Church of Satan, San Francisco. 2 1969 orders to the South American conquest. 3 cults division. 4 Catholic Church destruction of both Poland and Italy and Pope of Rome. United States cities involved in this operation: San Francisco, Houston, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Georgia, Miami, Florida. The Satan Church activities in the North and the Cuban Army by Cuban civilians into and trained for military installations, guerrilla activities, 1970s and 80s. Modern airports for military: Santa Cruz codename, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Yuma, Arizona, Great Bend, Kansas, Wichita and Kansas City, Scottsbluff, Nebraska, FX Missile Watch in the 80s. And western and eastern Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska, possibly Oklahoma and Dakotas. Meeting on this matter to be discussed in 1970, January 3rd, Denver, Colorado. Human sacrifices in the Honolulu Connection Narcotic Division, and the church-sponsored activities economics for future Cuban armaments for the Miami-based submarines to block off military aid to Europe and South America. Argentina military buildup, country-by-country economic and military activities. Andropov Church guerrilla activities and destruction of the church, 1980, Bulgarian and Albanian activities, etc. Hollywood pornographic movies, church aid to our people in USA, food to Haiti and aid to our people in USA, America money to pay for it, etc. Human sacrifices and money for narcotics to college, high school student, and Russian training in schools. First meeting, Denver, Colorado, mail drops for MX missiles, mail drops for Kansas Great Bend activities, Goodland, Kansas, December, Burlington, Colorado, November, Scottsbluff, Nebraska, once a month, Denver, Colorado, when needed, first and third Thursdays, and the following was the last letter that was intercepted. KGB, Moscow, Russia, Albania, Managua, Nicaragua, Phoenix, Arizona. Preacher, foreign sacrifices, human sacrifices, January each year, December winter. Alice Winters, 1979, age 3 years, British. Judith Valenzuela, Mexican, Monterrey, Santa Cruz, Bolivia. False sacrifice, October, number 432-11. AA 213 sacrifices, female American, female Deanne Arnold, Phoenix, Arizona, canceled military MX missile checkpoint, Wyoming and Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Church of Satan, Great Bend, Kansas sacrifices later, Sacrificed priests in USA earlier, 1982. Narcotic Division of the Italian Albania KGB, Yuri Andropopkov. Bulgaria plans, 1979. Preacher 3. South American military activities for Cuban invasion of the United States of America. Religion weapons to Cuba, Riff and Riff, RAF Army to USA. Prisoner and Russian agents, you will be assigned 2 members to Great Bend, 1 to Scotts Bluff, Nebraska checkpoint. MX Missile Complex, November 24th, 1978 to 1980. KGB orders, Denver, Colorado, Omaha, Nebraska, Phoenix, Arizona. Todor Zihov, Bulgaria. $, pound, L, left parentheses, ampersand, left parentheses. President Haxt Leshy, Albania, pound, left parentheses, percentage, left parentheses. President Celso Torello, September 18th, 1982. The attorneys turned these letters over to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the New Mexico State Police. There have been several Reddit forums, blogs, and podcasters who have mentioned this in their stories about Father Reynaldo. It's a huge conspiracy theory that we felt was important to mention, even though it doesn't seem to hold much water. Could the Latin Americans have kidnapped Father Reynaldo and killed him in the name of guerrilla warfare? Yes. But it doesn't seem likely when you think about it, and when you just look into Father Reynaldo's life. Father Reynaldo wasn't targeted. This is important to remember. He was a victim of happenstance. Whoever called the rectory that night didn't care which priest came. He just wanted a priest. He said it. Any priest will do. Since the internet wasn't available in the 80s, the best way to leave an anonymous tip was to send a letter, and several more letters were sent to various churches and even to the FBI field office in Albuquerque. The writers all claimed to know who killed Father Reynaldo. The Dianza Motor Lodge was built in 1939 and by the 80s was no more than a cheap motel. It closed down during the 80s and then was put on the city's historical list of landmarks. It got a facelift in 2017 and is now luxury apartments. During the 80s, the Dianza would have been one of the places those who were one step away from becoming unhoused would spend a night or two. Possible mental illness or drug addiction could be a contributor to the tone of the letter. The letter alluded to Father Reynaldo's death being connected to the mafia. It said that the phones in Archbishop Sanchez's office were tapped. The letter went on to claim that there was a mafia informant working with the Spanish syndicate who had gotten a job with the police to foil the investigation into Father Reynaldo's death. The writer claimed that Father Rivera was killed because the Spanish and Italian mafias were having a turf war over the churches. He speculated this was because these entities wanted to use the churches to sell narcotics. At one point, the letter writer ranted, quote, "Your church's doorways are a $17 million marketplace." The story really loses air when the writer claimed that he knew who killed Father Rivera because he was there when it happened. He claimed that Father Rivera was kidnapped in Lubbock, Texas, and then taken over the New Mexico state line where he was killed at the rest stop. Father Rivera was taken from the rest stop near Waldo, New Mexico. His body was later found not far from that rest stop. The letter goes on to give a description of the vehicles that were used in the murder and descriptions of these alleged perpetrators. It was signed Christopher Allen. The letter was addressed to the Archbishop, but the envelope was addressed to the U.S. Secret Service in Albuquerque. It arrived at the FBI field office in Albuquerque. The letter was handwritten with several crossed-out corrections, misspelled words, and was written top to bottom. Then up on the side of the paper, over the top, and then down the other side before continuing on the back. It was very long, the language was confusing, and the scribbles and scratches made it hard to read. The year before Father Rivera was murdered, a threatening letter was sent to Our Lady of Assumption Parish in Albuquerque. The letter was immediately turned over to the FBI since it did threaten the church. The church had been vandalized on May 30th before the letter was sent. The vandals broke into the church, poured blood on the main altar, and tracked blood through the church, then poured blood on the Blessed Sacrament altar. They left a buck hunting knife behind the main altar. The letter was received by Reverend Ronald Bruckner, who was the pastor of Our Lady of Assumption. The letter read, quote, "I was once the soul who sought the priesthood. What held me from becoming one was the constant evil conflict within me. I sought help from several priests who simply gave up on me. Their faith that they proclaimed did not hold true in their hearts. They were weak in faith. The hour has come, my friends. Your church is only the first. I will pay all the priests back in full. But the church is only the beginning. The priests at St. Pius shall be last. His infliction will be special. You will see the wrath of evil at conflict with so-called good and faith. There were also anonymous phone calls and threats. On August 11th, 1982, Father Benito Swen, parish priest of the church in Hurley, New Mexico, had gotten a phone call from a female who had a Bostonian accent. The woman claimed that Theodore Vinus was Father Reynaldo's murderer. The same woman called a telephone operator named Sally Prezano on the same day. Father Rivera was killed on the 5th, 6 days before. When the police went to the home to find the woman, they were told she didn't live there. They didn't know her. The police couldn't find any evidence that she had ever been at that home, so it was a dead end. On August 18th, 1982, a postcard that was postmarked Hurley, New Mexico was received by Father Griego, who was a priest at Queen of Heaven Catholic Church in Albuquerque. The postcard read, "The killer of Father Rivera from Santa Fe, New Mexico is Mr. Theodore Venus from Boston, Massachusetts. Venus is in exile from Boston and is now living in Phoenix, Arizona. Look for him among the Phoenix Mafia. Pornographic theaters and pornographic bars. Homosexual Venus is anti-religion and kills clergy from all religions, as well as his arson on churches. He burns them down. Venus is now broke, has lost his financial holdings in Boston, and is lying his way through life. I hope you catch him." On August 16, 1982, the governor's office received a postcard telling the same story. The card was handed over to police, who found that it had no post office stamp. That means it wasn't sent through the mail. It had to have been hand-delivered. Of course, not much came of anything that was sent to the police, or the anonymous phone calls, but Sergeant Ulivari was determined to follow up on every lead. He flew from one end of the country to the other, trying to find everyone who was mentioned in the case. This was time-consuming and expensive, and exhausting. It was an emotional roller coaster for everyone attached to Father Rivera. The police, the church, his brethren, but most of all, his family. Hopes would rise so high with every tip that was called in, only to crash when they would be proven false. There are several reasons that I addressed this part of Father Reynaldo's case, one of them being that no matter how crazy these things sound from our living rooms today, they were taken very seriously at the height of the investigation. The letters that were sent to the FBI and the attorneys in Kansas were taken extremely seriously, since they were not only part of a murder investigation, but also considered a national security threat. Remember, this was the height of the Cold War. When you combine that with civil wars fought in Latin America, Castro's Cuba, and wars in other parts of the world, those communications, no matter how strange they seem to us, were probably the things that were the most investigated. These false leads used manpower that could have been used for better things. It was a waste of energy and resources. They had to be followed, though, to ensure that they weren't going to amount to anything, but at the same time, they were a waste of time and money. There's still speculation that Father Rivera was killed by the Church of Satan, the KGB, the Nicaraguans, the Mafia, or the CIA, but that speculation was put to rest years ago. Even the theory behind it doesn't make much sense in the light of day. Why would any of those entities want to kill him? He wasn't involved with anything that had anything to do with the conflicts in Latin America. We've done some very intensive research into Father Reynaldo and his career, and nothing that we've seen or read has connected him to the civil wars or the Mafia in any way. His lifetime was spent ministering to the people of New Mexico. And one thing that everyone forgets when they talk about this case, he wasn't targeted. Remember, the caller said any priest will do. These communications make it seem like he was targeted. Someone wanted to kill Father Reynaldo, specifically. But that simply wasn't true. Father Gerard answered the first call that came through. He was the one that was originally asked to come. Since he couldn't drive at night, he asked the caller to wait and call back when another priest was there. There was no mention of Father Reynaldo. If Father Reynaldo hadn't been so dedicated, he might have told the caller to wait until the morning. Other churches might have done that as well. Not many would have been willing to go out at night to meet someone at a rest area. Father Reynaldo was acting on the teachings that were so ingrained in his life. He was dedicated to his ministry and his faith until the very end. As the investigation moves forward, Father Reynaldo would be connected to the deaths of other priests, and those connections would be proven false as well. Next time on True Consequences. Faith in Action, the Father Rivera story. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.